Bonjour. Welcome. This is the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, meeting number 17. We are very pleased to have with us today the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this is not the first time that Minister McKay has appeared before our committee, and indeed, each and every time that we've invited him to come, he's been more than willing to appear before our committee. Today's committee is in regards to our study on democratic development. And Mr. Minister, Senator Prudhomme has also advised me today that it is your birthday. And so I can tell you this, we are not going to sing happy birthday to you, but we do wish you a very good birthday. And Mr. Minister, we look forward to your comments.
And I wouldn't expect favorable treatment either, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And with me at the table is Michael Small, who is an Assistant Deputy Minister for Global Affairs. And let me thank you, Chair, as well as members of this committee individually and collectively for taking on this important task and furthering Canada's long tradition of promoting democracy. I think the work that you have before you will be extremely important and very valuable in this exercise of democracy promotion. I also believe it's very timely and will contribute greatly to identifying ways in which Canada can play a more active role on the world stage promoting democratic principles. Now, I don't want to prejudice the conclusions that you will reach, but I do hope that they will reflect a consensus that the promotion of democracy is an eminently worthy and intrinsically Canadian endeavour. It is an expression of our values as a nation, which transcends partisan interests. Now, each of you around this table as elected members of Parliament know the importance of democracy at the grassroots level. And you know that there are important principles of democracy across the board that we can all embrace. Promoting democracy has been an integral part of Canada's history, and generations of Canadians contributed to building our own democracy. And each generation has stood ready to defend our way of life and to act for the sake of others when their freedoms have been threatened. As far back as the First World War, Canada stood up for democracy. Indeed, many would say, and historians have said, that Canada became a nation at Vimy Ridge in the First World War. And notably, over 45,000 Canadians gave their lives defending democracy in the Second World War. Canada stood alongside other democracies, other nations, in opposition to totalitarian regimes for over 40 years of the Cold War. And since the Iron Curtain fell, we have extended a hand to dozens of new democracies around the world. The fight for universal suffrage and women's rights is very much a part of our history. The right to vote, run for office, serve in government. Notre engagement accru en Afghanistan.
Our commitment in our current engagement in Afghanistan is no exception. Throughout our history, Canadians have stood up to oppose ideologies that trample the rights of individuals to direct their own affairs. We have faced down threats to the freedom and stability of the world. Our own way of life depends on it. Our own values demand it. The government's emphasis on freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law is intended to be both a reflection of Canada's own core principles, some of the key ingredients in our success as a nation, and a guide in our response to many of the challenges and threats in the world today.
Democracy and human rights informs our opposition to authoritarian regimes, like those of Burma and Belarus, other countries in need of attention, North Korea and Iran, and yet it informs us of our unequivocal response to organizations that advocate violence and perpetrate terrorist acts. In March, Canada was the first country to suspend its assistance to the Hamas-led Palestinian Authority. Our position is firm. The Canadian government will not contact or provide funds to an organization that threatens the security of a sovereign nation like Israel, their people, and their democracy by using terrorist means. We hold out cautious optimism for development and efforts made by Mahmoud Abbas to alleviate the pressures that are currently holding the Palestinian people in such difficult circumstance. In April, the Canadian government listed the Tamil Tigers, LTTE, as a terrorist organization under the Criminal Code. This sends a clear signal that they must reject terrorism as a political tool. Just as Canada's government is engaged in promoting democracy around the world, Canada's civil society is involved in the same undertaking. And the time has come to expand our efforts in the face of a new generation of challenges. There is no one-size-fits-all, no perfect democracy, Mr. Chair, and the old saw about sausage making is true. It's not always an attractive process. Mais relever les défis actuels à la démocratie, permettez-moi, avant de parler de ces défis.
Before I speak about challenges to democracy, let us step back for a moment and put democracy promotion in a global context. When Nobel laureate Amartya Sen was asked to identify the single most important development of the past century, he didn't choose the end of colonialism. He didn't choose two devastating world wars. He didn't choose the rise of new economic centers of power. To Sen, the most striking feature of the 20th century was the rise of democracy as the preeminently acceptable form of governance. Democratic governance has been accepted as a universal norm. What explains the universal appeal of democracy? Countries may differ on the forms their democracy may adopt, but the values at the very heart of democracy resonate in every region and with every culture. Those values are the dignity of individuals and the importance that their consent be at the basis of government.
Automatically or even easily. And it happened because countries like Canada stood up for the values in which they believe. And in some cases, were prepared to fight and die for. For this is an important principle. It's not to sound maudlin or melodramatic, but just as previous generations of Canadians stood up for democracy, this generation must do the same. And let me suggest three salient reasons why Canada should commit itself to the promotion of democracy. First, our values themselves demand it. Canadians believe in the dignity of individuals and popular consent. That is why this government reacted strongly to the flawed presidential elections in Belarus this last month. It was a question of principle for Canada to object to this flagrant abuse of power, which denied the right of the peoples of Belarus to choose their government in a free and fair election and breached regional democratic standards. Mr. Chair, secondly, the promoting of democracy is a fundamental part of our efforts to build a more peaceful, stable, and prosperous world in which all can partake. Established democracies are more likely to enjoy peaceful relations between themselves and neighbors. This confers other benefits. It stabilizes international affairs. It provides an environment in which economic opportunity and prosperity can grow and flourish, and it facilitates sustainable development. In short, Mr. Chair, I believe that democracy on all of those scores is like a stainless steel umbrella that allows all of those other important developmental democratic principles, protection of rule of law, human rights, to flourish under that umbrella. Finally, the spread of democracy contributes directly to the security of Canadians. While not a cure-all to prevent terrorism, the appeal and the resilience of democratic systems of governance are among the best allies that we have in defeating terror. And there are many fragile states, Mr. Chair, that we should turn our attention to. And I might just, as a point of reference, reference Haiti and the Ukraine as two areas in which there is a fragile state as far as democracy is concerned, while at the same time commending them for the progress that was made. The fact that terrorists despise democracy and will go to great lengths should tell us something. How can there be rampant oppression and state-sponsored human rights abuses that give way to the power to remove them from office? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, it is the key. It is the key to unshackling people, to have them bestowed with the power to change their government. Democracies make stakeholders of those who are most directly affected by poverty, instability, and conflict. They empower citizens within their own political systems to focus attention on serious problems, to propose solutions, to take responsibility for their own fate. By providing avenues for peaceful change, they reduce the appeal for more violent alternatives. What can Canada's contribution be to this? Well, to that end, I look very much forward to hearing from you, hearing your views and findings as to how Canada can best assist other countries in achieving their aspirations for democracy. But let me offer a few thoughts on what I believe our country has to offer. With many of the contemporary challenges that surround the promotion of democracy, Canada enjoys some unique credibility, and with it some unique opportunities. I think there is an enormous well of goodwill in the broader global context. And having outsiders assist us with democratic reform can be very sensitive. Therefore, Canada's reputation as a fair player confers clear advantages. We were never a colonial power. We do not have great power ambitions. Our motives are not suspect. Our agenda is not hidden. And there is a tremendous, as I said, a tremendous depth of goodwill for Canadians. And it's partly because of our advocacy, but more so our active support for democratic values. Canada also has useful experiences to share with other countries. We may take too easily for granted at home what some others would like to emulate, and so our institutions must be highlighted to always work effectively and fairly. Bribes are not required to receive public service in this country. Our police forces are professional, judges impartial. Editors may criticize politicians. Protests can take place peacefully in this country. Elections are administered smoothly. Governing parties change and our political system remains intact. But it is not just Canada's institutions that are of interest to emerging democracies, I would add. We also have a wealth of individual expertise to share. Canada's civil society is a deep reservoir of people with experience in wrestling with many of the issues confronting democracies around the world. We have learned judges, journalists, a very dedicated and loyal public service that serves this country. And at this moment, there are thousands of Canadians from all walks of life fanned out around the world. Some of the most difficult and dangerous places in the world, you will find Canadians serving selflessly for causes that they believe. Helping people, I believe, again, and generosity are intrinsic Canadian values. Many Canadians are able to engage in this problem-solving in multiple languages, with respect and tolerance for other religions, other cultures. This also brings Canadians who are particularly sensitive to difficult and cultural, social context into a position of great ability to offer assistance. The vast majority of Canadians will agree that democracy should be a high priority for our foreign policy, and that is exactly where this government has placed it. Canada has something valuable to offer on this score. The more difficult question to address is how do we go about promoting democracy in the broader world? We should start by acknowledging that democracy is not something that outsiders can impose. It is part of the logic of democracy that it needs to be chosen and pursued by citizens themselves. Citizens around the world aspire to democracy, and assistance provided by outsiders should be driven by its recipients. In addition to development assistance, there is much that we can do in the political and diplomatic realm. The government of Brian Mulroney, for example, demonstrated its strong opposition to apartheid in South Africa. When we stand on a principle, Canadian leadership can make a huge difference. The great man himself, Nelson Mandela, credits Mr. Mulroney and Canada for their leadership in the end of apartheid in South Africa. Our membership in regional organizations also provides a platform for influence. Bodies like the Organization of American States have adopted democratic principles as conditions of membership, and that makes them a natural place to look to uphold and advance democratic standards. Similarly, cross-regional organizations like the Commonwealth and La Francophonie can play an important role. But Canada is much more than its government, and Canada's commitment to democracy extends well beyond politicians, diplomats, and developmental experts. Democracy involves our whole of society, all of Canada, and from our universities to our faith-based organizations, from our professional associations to our political parties, we should mobilize Canadian society in promoting democratic values. In every riding or constituency in Canada, we also have volunteer organizations who try to connect citizens with government by getting them out to vote and by canvassing their views for the next party platform to form government. In every neighborhood in this country, in every village, in every town, and every rural community, we have people passionate about particular causes or issues who band together to advocate their point of view. And in every community, there are women committed to overcoming obstacles to their equality, children who are committed to learning. And Mr. Chair, I would suggest that there is no particular organization that can take ownership of these issues. It is a collective community interest to address these issues of equality, of child poverty, poverty alleviation, and this allows for the protection and promotion of human rights for all. So having a way to mobilize members of civil society to help their opposite numbers in other countries is an important goal and ambition as well, I would add. The obstacles to democracy in different countries are legion. Unfortunately, Canada has legions of experts that can help people in those countries, fortunately I should say, to address these obstacles. I believe that we should make democracy promotion not just a priority for government, but for our entire society. And just like our forebears, the current generation of Canadians has its own mission to promote democracy in the face of modern challenges in the 21st century. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, the true test of strength, of belief, and of commitment and courage is your ability to stand for something when there is personal risk or discomfort, and when there is some cost to the person or country or organization, and yet you do it anyway on principle. And when it comes to democracy, I believe that democracy is a principle worth fighting for and standing for. It's a collective exercise. It takes practical as well as complex issues into consideration. And I would finally end by encouraging all of you to consult broadly. I know you will have many witnesses and many organizations before you. And as I said at the beginning, I very much look forward to the recommendations on how we can fulfill this task. And I look forward to your questions here this afternoon. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm just going to instruct our committee that we adjourn at 4:30. There are other meetings that are happening, and so at 4:30 we're going to be fairly strict with the clock. The first round, there's 10 minutes. Mr. Minister, you mentioned in your remarks a number of times fragile states referenced, and in fact you drew reference to Haiti. I want you to be aware that this committee is working very diligently, very hard on bringing together a report on Canada's efforts and responsibility, humanitarian efforts in Haiti, and that report will be coming forward fairly soon. So, so you know that we have been involved in this through the spring, and this is the second part. Democratic development is the second part of our overall study. We're going to go to the opposition first. 10 minutes. We have a minister here. The first round is 10 minutes. You may want to split up amongst your members. Mr. Martin? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Wilford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for coming, and I appreciated your remarks. The issue of how to promote democracy, and I think that one of the best ways is obviously at the grassroots level. In Canada past, for example, the commune elections in Cambodia was an excellent example of that. Past support by Foreign Affairs of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in terms of exchanges, which I hope will continue under your watch, I think is important. Engagement, I believe parliamentarians play a very important role, Minister, and that is one which I'd like to ask you about. We know that parliamentarians, particularly in Asia, they have executive-dominated societies, very weak legislatures. My many years in working in Asia tell me that my colleagues in that part of the world are very interested in having the proper tools and instruments to promote democracy, to be a real check and balance. For example, in Vietnam, the Foreign Affairs Committee is actually now acting as an oversight role at the National Assembly level for government. My questions to you, first of all, Minister, through you, Mr. Chairman. One, what role do you see specifically Canadian parliamentarians playing in multilateral organizations to help promote democracy? What effective tools do you think we need to have in place, or do you believe we have in place, in terms of measuring the effectiveness, both in terms of the overall assistance through, say, CETA, or through engagement, whether it be by parliamentarians, government, or bureaucracy? And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman.
Minister, you respond to that, then we'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilford. And first of all, I acknowledge your great interest and ongoing efforts in this regard. I know you've traveled extensively, particularly in Asia. I think one of the most basic measures or standards that we can set as far as democracy is concerned, and it's certainly not the only standard, is participation in elections. And one of the most important roles that I've seen Canada play in recent years is just that, election oversight. I think Elections Canada and Jean-Pierre Kingsley specifically and others have done yeoman service representing our country, but more importantly, going to places like Haiti, like some of the African countries, and doing their level best to promote participatory democracy, fair elections. Now, there are telltale signs when elections have gone awry. We've seen examples of that where ballots were stuffed or went missing. And so, while elections are not the be-all and end-all, they are the surest sign that a country is at least, in essence, moving towards democratic principles and empowerment of people to change their government, as opposed to some of the coups that we've seen most recently in Thailand. And so I think that is an area where we are already seeing tangible contributions by Canadians. Your reference to other forms or organizations, I think, is going to be very much, I would at least encourage you to make that part of the essence of your study. Looking at other countries, for example, that embrace these arm's length bodies that are set up in such a way to promote democracy. And the National Endowment for Democracy is one example of an international body that has reach far beyond its own country's boundaries. Transparency, accountability within those organizations, I think, demonstrates as well that they're following democratic principles in the governance of themselves. I think there's nothing that can set democracy back more than having an organization that is out promoting these principles fall victim to its own autocratic and undemocratic ways. So I think, and I would again encourage you to have some of these models. I think there are quite a few in Great Britain, France, that promote participation, promote the type of full and fair and free democratic elections that really are the landmark of countries taking control of their own destiny. And to that end, Foreign Affairs as well as CETA have to continue to fund these organizations sufficiently to make their mark. And I would suggest that we have to, with the greatest information available, gauge, just as you've said, the progress that is being made and target countries that we feel we can make the greatest difference. I think if we have a completely uninformed scattergun approach and we try to be everywhere at the same time, we're not going to accomplish the same results that we would if we take a focused, principled attack. Ukraine was an area where members of this committee went and made a significant contribution, as did Elections Canada. So I think I would defer back to you for some good advice on where those efforts should be focused.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Cullen.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for Yes, right. Thanks for coming. I'll make my question short. Thanks for the presentation, which I think was more philosophical in nature, and I'm not sure if the expectation was you'd come here today with some proposals. I guess not, but you put the challenge back to the committee. So I have 3 ideas for you, Minister, that I'll throw out. And it picks up on the theme we just touched on, the role of parliamentarians. I just came back from Arusha, Tanzania, where our colleague John Williams heads up the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. And the reality is that you cannot build democratic institutions if you have corrupt countries, corrupt leaders, and money being laundered into offshore banking centers. So I would encourage you, and I know that the Department through the Human Security Branch and others have been somewhat supportive of GOPAC. I hope you can do more, because I think there is a big role for legislators. Secondly, you touched on fragile states. I would also recommend that we pay a little more attention to failed states. Somalia is a case in point. It's something that I've been working on for years. I think we missed a bit of the envelope. It's never too late, but these failed states become breeding grounds for extremism and end up being a bigger problem than if we dealt with them, proactively at the beginning. And finally, if we look at the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly in Strasbourg, I think it's time the government looked at this more seriously in terms of us having some modest mission. Right now, Strasbourg is served by Brussels. It was Bern. And with the huge volume of work that's going on with parliamentarians in the Parliamentary Assembly, the Council of Europe is the preeminent body in Europe for democracy and human rights, and goodness knows we have challenges in Europe in that regard. And I think it's time to look at having a modest mission in Strasbourg to serve those particular needs. Thank you.
Cullen?
I thank you for the input, Mr. Cullen. And I did come here very much with the intent to just put forward some broad themes as opposed to suggest where we are. I wanted to very much invite you to give us input as to where you think we should be going as a government, particularly in the area of promotion of democracy. There are some other bodies that I neglected to mention in response to Mr. Wilford, including GOPAC, which Mr. Williams has shown a great deal of leadership on, and they had a recent conference, I believe, in Tanzania that was quite successful. Foreign Affairs supported that to a large degree. The international rights and democracy work that's being done within the department, as well as other civil society bodies and organs. There's a Democratic Council, the Forum of Federations, the Parliamentary Center, which also very much promotes just what you've said, the participation of parliamentarians themselves and legislators who go abroad, bring their expertise and interest in areas of promotion to bear. And so I know that your intent is very much to expand our reach into areas, including failed states that you've suggested, which I would be quick to add also includes Afghanistan. Afghanistan is another country where, sadly, if years ago we had not abandoned Afghanistan, we might not find ourselves in the position we're in today. And Somalia, you point out, is another very salient country. Sudan and Darfur the same. And Haiti, it's another example where they were making progress and fell back. And to a somewhat lesser degree, we have to embrace those shortcomings, but also not make the same mistakes. Georgia comes to mind as a country that is, again, making great strides, but we can't abandon them or simply say our work here is done because they've been able to achieve democratic elections and are well on their way. We have to continue to support them into the future, but I take your comments to heart.
Thank you, Minister. Madame Bourbeau, vous avez 10 minutes.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Mackay.
10 minutes, Ms. Barbeau. Thank you for coming to meet with us today, Mr. McKay. You spoke about Canadians' experience that can be beneficial to other countries. What we assume here are things that other countries would like to have. You mentioned in particular the way in which our democratic environment works. There is no bribery. Police forces are professional. The fact that the political class can be criticized, we agree with all of that along with you. You also referred to the fact that sometimes we take too much for granted. And in this democratic context, it appears that sometimes however good our institutions may be, they have some problems behaving as we would like in the democratic context. And that has been proven by the results in the FAAE matter. It seemed to us in that context that the first duty of the government would be to assume its share of responsibility as a government as to what happened, namely that Mr. Maher Arar was a Canadian citizen who was deported and tortured in another country. The Canadian government as such should, in our view, take the first step that a Canadian citizen would expect, namely apologize for what was done. I think the other issues are going to be directed to lawyers and things will be done in that regard. However, it seems to us strange, to say the least, that so far there have been no apologies to Mr. Arar or his family. What is your view on that? First of all, thank you for your question. There isn't an answer on the part of all parliamentarians in the House. Last week, there was an answer, but for greater clarity, I will reply in English.
Democracy goes far beyond our elections, our political system. It has to extend to our judiciary. It has to extend to all levels of society. And I think, in fairness, the previous government went to the extent of having a public inquiry into this matter, because there is very much a need for self-examination and preservation of your own country's democratic integrity. And so to that end, we have now in possession a very complex report with numerous salient recommendations that will provide some serious lessons learned and our ability to avoid the type of extradition as we've seen that led to the circumstances that Mr. Arar faced in Syria. So taking responsibility, lessons learned, I absolutely agree with you. I would suggest, though, that to simply respond quickly without taking into account all of the important information that was gathered during that inquiry, the important recommendations of Mr. O'Connor, I think it's fair to say, take some time to digest, to discern how best to proceed vis-a-vis future practices. We have the Monterey Protocol now, as you know, in place to avoid the type of misinformation being extended or arbitrary acts taken by other countries when it comes to deportation and extradition. And so I think we're well on our way to improving upon the current practices, but there is more to be done. And that report itself, I think, is the basis to improve upon an important element of Canada's own democratic system, and that is public accountability for actions that the government takes.
Or Bourgeois?
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Je vais terminer, si vous permettez là-dessus. Ma question.
If I'd like to continue on Mayor Arar and his family, the Canadian citizens. I understand all of the things that will happen subsequently, but a Canadian citizen who was mistreated, why is it that the government, in the interests of compassion, well, why is it taking so long for the government to acknowledge that this person was treated improperly by the authorities of this country? Ms. Barbeau, I said that 10 days is not a long time for an answer, for a response. And there was a response from all members of Parliament last week. But for the future, it's important to understand all of the recommendations contained in the report.
Another important aspect to the Arar case that we can't overlook, and that is the fact that Mr. Arar himself has launched a lawsuit against the Government of Canada, the United States, and Syria. If we make impromptu or improper remarks about this, we do not want to jeopardize his legal case, quite frankly. So respect for the rule of law and ongoing process that he has begun is also part of the government's responsibility and that is very much a factor as far as what the government will say.
Merci, Madame Bourgeois.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Ministre, bonjour.
Ms. Bourgeois, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Minister. Allowing democracy to establish itself in a country allows a country to establish its own institution. We know that Canada, through CETA, is present in a number of countries to provide assistance, whether it is legal advice or advice regarding good governance. Many countries, CETA is present in a number of countries, including China, where there is an injection of $265 million to assist democracy in China. Does CETA have any obligation to produce results to prove whether these millions are being well spent? Question number 2, there is no policy statement on democratic development, neither for Canada nor for CETA. Is there any plans to bring forward such a statement? And finally, with respect to Afghanistan, we assume that at some point the Afghanis will be able to assume responsibility for the safety of their country. Has Canada thought about a transfer of authority to the Afghan forces, and how will that be done?
Monsieur le Président, et merci, chers collègues, pour.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. The last question regards the future missions in Afghanistan. There is no doubt that it is a plan for the future to turn over full control of Afghanistan to the government and people of that country. But the time for such a transfer is not now, because there is conflict, particularly in the southern part of the country. And there's a great deal of work underway in terms of capacity building and democratic development.
37 countries involved in the NATO mission, and the 60 other countries that are doing development work there have not achieved the necessary results. In the London Compact, they go through a number of very important signposts that will tell us when that exit can occur. And quite frankly, in just 5 years, I would suggest to you that the results that have been achieved already are extraordinary when one compares to where Afghanistan was just a few short years ago. 5 million more kids in school, microcredit available to women, women voting, participating in democracy. How's this for a country making progress? 27% of their elected parliamentarians are women. That's more than Canada. And they're having great efforts towards infrastructure building, roads, highways, schools, hospitals, that will allow their economy to start that slow recovery. One of the big issues that remains there to deal with, as you know, is the poppy and heroin problem. We haven't been able to eradicate or completely deal with that issue just yet. So I would suggest that it would be nothing short of negligent for us to pull back at this critical time. We just spoke about fragile states or failed states. And you can't leave before the work is done. You can't leave until the security will sustain all of the important development and governance and infrastructure building that is underway in that country. As for future priorities, c'est difficile pour moi de répondre.
It is difficult for me to talk about CETA's priorities. I understand that the minister responsible for CETA, Ms. Werner, will be appearing before the committee in the future. I think it is better if I leave it up to her to answer that question.
Clearly, there are human rights priorities in China that Canada can make a contribution to. I met with the Chinese foreign minister in New York last week, and we raised a number of issues, including our concern for a Canadian citizen, Mr. Jalil, who is in jail in China. We have concerns about their justice system. We have concerns about the way in which their democracy functions, if we can call it that. And so, as far as the investment of actual resources in Canada to that end, that is something that we're re-examining. But I would suggest that there is still a contribution that Canada can make on that front. And all right, I'll leave it at that then,
Thanks,
Mr. Chair.
Minister. We'll go to the government side now. Mr. Van Loan and Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien first.
Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the Minister to the committee. And while the Minister alluded about our promotion and our strengthening of democratic institutions, which I'm sure the committee will study, we just talked about Afghanistan, but I want you to talk about another success story that Canada has been doing, and that under your authority I went to East and Central Africa to look at the peace initiative that is taking place in the Congo area, in the Great Lakes region area, of which Canada is a co-chair, to bring promotion of peace to Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and the surrounding areas. And what was amazing was to see how Canada, the co-chair, was helping democracy come to Congo, which was after 40 years of rule. And I want to tell my colleagues, just imagine a ballot box with 843 names. Just, there were 843 names on each ballot box out there. And the people actually, and these are illiterate Africans who went out there and participated in these elections very strongly. And Canada has been playing a very, very strong role in there. And this is, one can say, a forgotten area of Africa where people are not seeing Canada's contribution. And this is a great success story that you probably want to allude on.
Right, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. O'Brien, we very much appreciate the work that you did there and the report that you've provided upon your return. And it underscores the important contribution that can be made, particularly in the electoral process. I believe Canada contributed somewhere in the range of $12 million for that particular election process, and it was a resounding success, as you've said, just as we've seen successful elections in Haiti. And what that does, in my view, as much as it demonstrates the value of democracy to those countries, it also inspires surrounding countries to see the benefits that flow from having free elections. It also very much changes an attitude and empowers people to participate, to see that the power of change does exist where they have been living under a totalitarian regime. It gives them back the type of human dignity that they need to make decisions for themselves. And so, having been there yourself, having seen it firsthand, I think that should be similarly inspirational for those that were there, that witnessed it. As you know, there is an upcoming conference in the Great Lakes region, which Canada will co-chair. I think that it's fair to say that while there are further elections that will come, this is exactly the type of thing that prevents the type of violence, the type of coups, the type of corruption that have existed, sadly, in many African countries in the leadership and the upper echelons of those governments. This type of process is something that we have to continue to support, and I believe that the transition process in Congo is one example of many countries in Africa where Canada can make, a substantial contribution. We also, in the broader picture there in the region, as you know, have to continue, and I know that Mr. Martin and others around this table have been speaking out publicly about raised awareness of the need for the United Nations mission, the transition that has to take place between the African Union forces, the United Nation forces. That, again, in the global picture, is really, in my view, the only way we're going to be able to stop the incredible violence, loss of life, slaughter of innocents, and move down the road to more democratic practices like Congo. And Congo's been one of a number of notable examples on the continent.
Mr. Minister, Mr. Van Loan.
Yes, and I'm going to take the easy way out and read one of the questions actually prepared by our researchers for us. And it says that some analysts have argued that a better funded and more high-profile institution is needed to advance Canadian foreign policy goals in the area of democracy promotion.
Current activities are seen as too small and dispersed to have much cumulative effect. As well, unlike in the United States and a number of European countries, in Canada, political parties have not been directly involved in international democracy assistance. Thomas Axworthy, he was, of course, Pierre Trudeau's Chief of Staff, and Leslie Campbell, he's a New Democrat, I understand, have recently proposed creating a Democracy Canada Institute, which would see parties become more involved in its activities. I gather Tom Axworthy is coming before us as a witness, and I believe Les Campbell is on the list at some point, hopefully, too. And this may be the one specific proposal that people make to us to embrace, and I gather it's has some similarities to the National Endowment for Democracy you referred to, the Westminster Foundation that the British have, or the Dutch Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. If we were, as a committee, to recommend to the government pursuing that suggestion and going down that path and encourage the government to do that, do you know what would be your response to that kind of approach?
Well, I guess, my initial response, subject to advice from this committee, is that we would embrace that type of approach. I think we can do more, in fact, to go about promoting some of these democratic institutions within our own country that do a lot of work in partnering with the private sector. I think they provide, in some cases, more independent advice. Mr. Axworthy is obviously a very scholarly person on this subject, and there are others. There are many in the country that I think have a lot to offer. Having those type of foundations, which in some cases do require some resources, in my view, allows us to have the necessary reach, the necessary factual base upon which to work. One of the things that I think all governments, even vibrant democracies like our own, can sometimes become too insular in their thinking. And that's why I think partnering with universities, partnering with and promoting these type of democratic institutes have a lot of merit. So that would be something that I think we would support. We would obviously want to hear more of the detail of how they would function, what the costs associated with that type of foundation might be. And, I think as well, one of the important elements that we would want to know more about is how they would govern themselves and what their purpose would be, what their membership would look like, and what their founding principles were going to be in terms of how that would fit with the promotion of democracy abroad.
We have 3 minutes left.
Well, I welcome that openness. I mean, the one observation I think that others have made is that Canadians, in terms of political parties, are actually, the Americans do a lot of this, but the Canadians are actually better equipped because American elections tend to be focused on spending a lot of money. Canadians, we have a much more volunteer-reliant base and a lot of skilled expertise, and being able to mobilize them would be a good way of doing that. So I'll simply make that observation in passing. I've also made the observation that there are various different models for where we're trying to promote democracy. There are some countries that are eager recipients. If we looked at a lot of the former communist ones, that were very easy to work with. There are some countries that are, I might call them democracy challenged. We saw what happened in Ukraine. I think Georgia and Moldova are places where progress is happening, but there are also threats of it being rolled back. There are some that are clearly hostile or moving in the wrong direction. I mean, Cuba, for example, would be hostile, and then we get into the failed and fragile states one where it's a question of what do you do in a difficult situation. If Canada were to look at its democracy promotion from a big picture level, do you think there's any of those areas that are better worth our focus? Do you think we should focus in a regional way? Do you think we should focus, or should we try and do everything everywhere?
Well, I think, hearkening back to what I said a moment ago to an earlier question, first of all, I don't think there's one size fits all or any perfect democracy or model that we have to point to as this is the only way that it can work. And I think that, very importantly, democratic models can be consistent, for example, with other cultural beliefs, other institutional practices. I mean, there's no imposing of one style of democracy. It depends very much on the specifics of how the country itself has evolved. I think historical context is very important when you're looking at ways to promote democracy. I think as well that regional interests are one thing. The country itself has to be willing to embrace what Canada might have to offer. And so the basic principles that we believe in, that we're prepared to defend, have to be shared to a large degree, I would suggest, before we're going to be able to provide any meaningful assistance. Efforts to promote regional reform around democratic principles require, I think, a delicate and thoughtful approach. I think it involves being consultative, being open and transparent about what you're trying to achieve. I think in years past, many countries, many democratic countries, almost did this in a very quiet and almost nefarious way. If they were seen to be promoting democracy in other countries, this was seen to be undermining other countries' forms of government. I don't believe that. I think if you're very upfront about what you're hoping to accomplish and what basic good can flow from democratic practices, I think that you learn very quickly whether the country that you may be interested in is ready to embrace that. And so I think our efforts to promote democracy are predicated very much on the willingness of the country itself. And I think that what is uniquely Canadian about the way that we would do it, and the way I suggest that we have done it successfully, is that we do it in a less intrusive and more inclusive way, where we offer assistance as opposed to taking an approach that says we have all the answers for you and here's what you should do.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And our last in the first round, and it looks like all we will be able to get to, colleagues, is one round today. But Madame McDonough, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Not nearly enough time, but I appreciate the Minister coming before the committee. And I want to just pursue three subjects that have been raised. The first is concerning Meher Arar. You know, I think the discussion about democracy is an easy one in terms of agreeing as a committee from all sides about the importance of democracy. But I think the test is, what do we really mean by that? And I think people look on with some horror at the Arar injustices from not just within the country but across the world, at the unbelievable events that occurred to his life. And I guess I just would ask you to address further the continuing refusal, in fact, your own comments again today, to simply acknowledge the apology owing, the formal governmental apology owing, and secondly, to give a clear statement of commitment to just compensation. To hide behind lawyers because there could be some, battles around this down the road does not serve, I think, as an acceptable excuse for not making a clear, unequivocal statement about fair compensation owing and a clear formal apology. And I wanted to ask if you'd comment on that briefly. Secondly, you referred, I think, with some justification to the fact that Canada has an advantage among the nations advancing democracy because of a positive reputation in the world that we have. But you will know, I'm sure, that before this committee, again and again and again, over the last several years, we've had testimony from many, many respected international NGOs, diplomats, academics, and so on, including, by the way, the current president of CETA, that in fact Canada's reputation has dwindled, declined, deteriorated significantly because, among other things, of Canada's failure to deliver in any significant way on our overseas or official development assistance obligations, with timetables and targets, with serious, steady progress towards the long overdue 0.7. And very specifically, I want to ask, in view of the fact that democracy is really an empty concept, I mean, it's an abstraction, unless in fact people can see the conditions of life improving, and those are indeed the positive conditions in which democracy is likely to flourish. So I want to ask about your government's commitment to finally bringing in the legislation that your leader committed to, that this committee unanimously proposed to government should be supported. And in fact, Parliament unanimously endorsed in Parliament a year and a half ago. I want to ask about your government's commitment to follow through on that. And thirdly, with respect to Afghanistan, which you invoked several times as an example of good progress, and specifically referred to the improved status of women, citing 27% women in Parliament. I know that you must know that, in fact, the conditions for women are utterly horrifying in many, many parts of Afghanistan. And just to cite briefly, I think a really appalling example of something that happened right here under this roof. We had President Karzai address us. I and several of my colleagues had an opportunity to talk with a number of Afghani Canadian women following the address to say, if you had an opportunity to make a statement, to raise questions in the House, what would they be, given your commitment to advancing status of women and democracy? And they said to ask about the incredible amount of violence, brutalization, raping, bribing, killing in some cases, by warlords, by drug lords, by Northern Alliance, and an acknowledgement that the Taliban are not the only threat to the safety and security and the status of women in Afghanistan. And what we heard was jeering, what we heard was heckling from the government benches from one end to the other at such a question. So I want to ask if you could address that question in an honest, forthright way, because it remains a very serious concern that is raised again and again and again by women and on behalf of women in Afghanistan today in many parts of the country.
Thank you, Madam McDonough. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. McDonough, thank you for the question. And you and I were in Afghanistan together, and we saw the, I would suggest, significant progress that is being made, particularly in Kabul. Is there more work to do? Unquestionable. Is there still atrocities taking place? Are women still being exploited? Do they have an equal footing, an equal place in society inside that country? No, they don't.
In the hands of somebody other than just the Taliban. I think that's what people are desperate to hear this government acknowledge, because it seems as though it's a truth that's unmentionable.
Well, the truth that I know that's out there is that the Taliban were one of the most vicious, repressive regimes that have ever darkened the door of any country. And what we have seen is significant change in the circumstance and progress of women's rights inside the country. That's undeniable. Is it enough? Is it sufficient? Is there still work to be done? Absolutely there is. But I don't think somehow overlooking the fact that women are in a better place today in Afghanistan than they were 5 years ago. I mean, it betrays the reality. And it also, I think, undermines the suggestion that we should somehow pull back, that we should abandon our mission in Afghanistan, that we should stop providing the defense and the security and the protection, keeping in mind Canada's long-standing promotion of the responsibility to protect. If we were to leave, then the Taliban are going to come back just as quick and begin those oppressive practices again. Is there work, particularly in the south, where the struggles remain very fierce? Yes, and we're committed to continuing our presence there, to do all of the good things that you and I both want to see happen for women and children and human life.
What makes it unmentionable that there are serious abuses towards women by the Northern Alliance, by the warlords, by the drug lords?
Just let the Minister finish.
It's not unmentionable. You've mentioned it. And that's one of the great things about this country. One of the great things about this country is you can have opinions and I can have opinions, and we can express them freely. We can have disagreements publicly. We can debate them on the floor of the House of Commons, here at committee. People inside Afghanistan didn't have that right 5 years ago. And so to suggest that there are warlords, that there are people still involved in some of the bodies that are still functioning inside Afghanistan that are committing atrocities, nobody denies that. Nobody. But what we're there to do is obviously, along with a UN-backed NATO mission, bring about the type of stability that will allow democracy to flourish, that will allow further development, that will allow the important work of the provincial reconstruction teams to take hold, that will allow the provision of aid, microcredit, infrastructure spending, the building of institutions, including a judiciary, a police force, and an Afghan army, and back to Madame Barbeau's question, eventually allow the people of Afghanistan and their democratically elected government to walk on their own. And then, and only then, can we talk about an exit strategy. But I would suggest to do that prematurely is abandoning the very things that we believe in terms of promoting democracy and everything that flows from it. On CETA, our commitment remains very real. In fact, we've increased CETA's budget by 8% a year, and it will double by the year 2012. So we are still very much moving towards the 0.7 commitment. It's clear to me that, again, CETA's programs are making a difference in many corners of the world, just as I would suggest a lot of Canadians who work in NGOs and work in other organizations, even those that are not necessarily originating in our own country. The International Red Cross has a lot of Canadians working abroad. Many youth organizations are the beneficiaries of Canadian participation. Do we have an obligation to do more? Is there progress being made? Yes, absolutely there is. And it's not perfect. It's not fine-tuned, perhaps, to the extent that everyone would want it to be, but it's done with the best intent. And I would suggest that the talented and very committed people in CETA are always looking for ways to do more with the resources that they have at their availability. Your last question about Mr. Arar, let me just say that it was horrible, absolutely deplorable what happened to him, what they did to him in Syria, and we've communicated that very clearly. How that came about was the subject of another democratic principle that we embrace in this country, and that's to have judicial and public inquiries. When there have been instances where our system breaks down and fails Canadian citizens like Mahar Arar, and we have to improve upon that based on the lessons learned. But there's another principle here, and that's the rule of law. Mr. Arar has a $400 million lawsuit against the Government of Canada. I'm not going to say anything today that's going to jeopardize that lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And that we're going to adjourn now. Again, just to underscore, Mr. Minister, we appreciate you availing yourselves and coming to this committee. Want to remind you that this fall we look forward to having you back again. We will be discussing the estimates and the supplementary estimates, and we look forward to you being there for that. We are adjourned.